There are films that explore psychic power, and then there is The Fury, a story that behaves less like a movie and more like a classified incident someone accidentally allowed into theaters. Its images don't simply depict telekinesis. They pulse with the suggestion that thought itself can be weaponized, reshaped, and turned back against the people who try to control it. From the first frame, the film moves with the quiet confidence of something that knows more than it is willing to reveal. Every smile hides tension. Every touch hints at surveillance. Every shadow feels like it's listening. When Brian De Palma approached this project, he didn't soften its brutality or polish its paranoia. Instead, he leaned into the notion that psychic force is not an extraordinary ability, but a symptom, the visible result of emotional damage inflicted long before the story begins. His lens doesn't merely watch the characters, it probes them as though searching for the fracture lines beneath their faces. In a decade soaked in political suspicion and whispers of government experimentation, The Fury became a cinematic echo of real fears people rarely admitted out loud. What lingers isn't the spectacle or even the explosive finale that audiences still talk about decades later. It's the sense that the violence is born from something deeply human: grief, betrayal, exploitation carried too far. The supernatural is simply the language the film uses to describe wounds no one knew how to name. And as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the truth behind The Fury isn't in the plot, but in the details left half buried along the way. Details that reveal themselves only when you look closely enough. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The Fury. Fact 1. Brian De Palma approached The Fury with the mindset of someone dissecting a secret rather than directing a story. From the earliest scenes, he crafted a world where calm doesn't soothe, it deceives. The opening moments feel sunlit and effortless, but there's an unnerving stillness beneath them, as though every character already knows something terrible is waiting just beyond the frame. De Palma believed the most frightening moments arise when danger hides in plain sight. So he filmed those early interactions with a precision that feels almost surgical, guiding the viewer into a trap they don't realize they've entered. The original script contained lengthy expository passages explaining the origins of the psychic program, its motives, and its failures. De Palma cut nearly all of it. He wanted mystery to function like an infection, something that spreads quietly until it consumes the viewer's imagination. His direction pushed the actors to internalize fear rather than express it. Instead of shouting, they swallowed their reactions. Instead of revealing emotion, they locked it behind controlled expressions. It created an atmosphere where silence becomes more revealing than speech. This restraint is what gives the film its slow burn unease. The later psychic eruptions feel inevitable, like pressure finally forcing its way to the surface. De Palma's worldview seems to echo through the film. Horror is not born from supernatural power, but from the way ordinary people handle forces they were never meant to touch. What makes this fact so compelling is simple: De Palma didn't build tension. He allowed it to gather quietly and relentlessly until it could no longer be contained. Fact 2. Kirk Douglas's performance in The Fury carries the intensity of a man refusing to yield, not just as a character, but as an actor confronting his own physical limits. At this point in his career, Douglas had nothing left to prove, yet he approached the role of Peter Sansa as if it demanded every ounce of resolve he still possessed. His determination became one of the film's defining energies. When he chose to perform his own stunts, he didn't do so out of vanity. He did it because he believed the character's desperation needed to be physically honest. During the rooftop chase and the chaotic Middle Eastern ambush, Douglas insisted on repeating takes even after the crew recommended caution. De Palma, recognizing the authenticity Douglas brought to the role, allowed the scenes to stretch into moments of raw unpredictability. One instance involved Douglas diving into water while practical explosions fired behind him. The director delayed calling cut, observing the actor's instinctual struggle against the chaos of the moment. It was risky, but the footage captured a genuine sense of peril that no choreography could have replicated. Douglas's commitment wasn't just physical. He played Sansa with a mix of exhaustion and ferocity, as if the character's grief sharpened every decision he made. Instead of portraying him as a heroic rescuer, Douglas leaned into a more haunting truth, a father who has already lost too much to survive on hope alone. His performance anchors the film not by offering stability, but by revealing how far a broken man will go when the world has already taken everything from him. Fact 3. Amy Irving's portrayal of Gillian is often remembered for its vulnerability, but the way she crafted that fragility was far more methodical than viewers realize. De Palma wanted her psychic episodes to feel invasive rather than theatrical, something that happened to her rather than something she performed. To achieve that, Irving immersed herself in studying altered states of consciousness, dissociative episodes, fainting patterns, and involuntary muscle responses. She was drawn to the idea that psychic power, if it existed, would resemble a neurological rupture instead of a dramatic burst. On set, De Palma created an environment that amplified her emotional isolation. During critical sequences, especially those involving mirrors or observation rooms, he instructed the crew to maintain absolute silence. No whispered cues. No adjustments mid-take. Irving was left alone in a space that felt more like an experiment chamber than a film set. That absence of human presence shaped her performance, causing her movements to become small, reactive, and tense. She later described it as acting in a room that didn't want me there. One particular scene where Gillian senses a violent psychic echo demanded that Irving transition from calm to terror without external triggers. De Palma refused to use sound cues or visual markers to guide her. Instead, he encouraged her to internalize the sensation of being overwhelmed by something intangible. The result is one of the film's most haunting moments, a portrayal of psychic pain that feels deeply personal rather than fantastical.
Irving's stillness, more than any explosion or special effect, becomes the film's emotional hinge.
It's a reminder that the true cost of psychic power in the Fury is not what it does to others, but what it destroys inside the person forced to carry it. Fact 4. John Cassavetes approached the role of Ben Childress with a level of restraint that felt almost predatory. While many actors build menace through volume or aggression, Cassavetes understood that true intimidation lives in stillness. He believed a character with real authority doesn't need to raise his voice or telegraph cruelty. Instead, he let Childress's power settle into the quiet spaces, the half-second pauses, the unbroken stare, the calm refusal to react when others grew emotional. That subtlety made the character infinitely more dangerous. Behind the scenes, Cassavetes resisted traditional blocking. He often asked De Palma to remove gestures he felt were too expressive, arguing they weakened the character's internal rigidity. In one tense exchange with Kirk, Douglas Cassavetes deliberately delayed his lines, stretching the silence until the tension felt unbearable. The camera caught Douglas adjusting his own performance in real time, trying to interpret what Cassavetes was doing. De Palma loved the unpredictability, claiming the scene had more electricity than any explosion. Cassavetes was battling exhaustion during production, a result of juggling his own directing commitments with acting. Instead of diminishing his performance, the fatigue sharpened Childress's detached presence. His slow movements, hollowed gaze, and measured breathing became part of the character's psychological texture. What lingers is the uncomfortable truth: Cassavetes understood villains don't always shout. Sometimes they whisper, and that whisper becomes the loudest threat in the room. Fact 5. The psychic laboratory in The Fury evolved into something far stranger than the screenplay originally intended. When De Palma first reviewed the production designs, he rejected them for being too clean, too rational. He imagined the facility not as a scientific hub, but as a contradiction, a place where cruelty hides behind clinical order. He wanted the walls to look sterile, while the emotional atmosphere felt contaminated. The result was a space that appears organized yet fundamentally wrong, like a room built by people who understand tools but not the human beings subjected to them. The art department rebuilt the environment using mismatched electronics, outdated machinery, and reflective surfaces that multiplied every movement in the room. They intentionally placed equipment at awkward angles, creating a layout devoid of logic or comfort. Even the furniture was arranged to disorient the actors, forcing them to stand or sit in positions that felt unnatural. Amy Irving responded viscerally to the space. She said it felt like stepping into a place where the air watched you. The two-way mirrors amplified that discomfort, turning the room into a psychological maze of reflections and unseen observers. De Palma leaned into that unease, using static shots that made the environment feel predatory. The laboratory became more than a set, it became a symbolic cage. A reminder that institutions capable of inflicting harm rarely look frightening, they look efficient. Fact 6. De Palma's fascination with slow motion reached new heights in the fury where time seems to stretch, not for beauty, but for dread. His goal wasn't to stylize violence, but to expose what lies beneath it, the tremor before the impact, the fear that flickers across a face the moment the body realizes what the mind already knows. Slow motion in his vision became a microscope for terror rather than a spectacle. Richard H. Klein tested several unconventional camera rigs to achieve the ultra-slow sequences De Palma wanted. These machines were sensitive to heat, light, and even vibration. They malfunctioned, often producing imperfect footage filled with flickers, smears, and warped frames. Instead of discarding these errors, De Palma embraced them. He believed flaws in the image made the scenes feel unstable, as though psychic energy were distorting the film itself. Actors found the process grueling. Emotional breakdowns had to be performed at a fraction of natural speed, forcing them to sustain expressions that felt physically impossible. Irving described one slow-motion collapse as the longest fall of my life, a moment where her body fought against the unnatural pacing. This approach created scenes that feel suspended between reality and dream, where every second seems aware of its own fragility. De Palma didn't just slow time for emphasis. He slowed it to reveal the cracks in human fear frame by frame until the audience could no longer look away. Fact 7. John Williams' score for The Fury stands apart from the grand orchestral triumphs that defined his late 70s career. Here he abandoned heroic crescendos and comforting harmonies in favor of something colder, more fractured. Williams approached the music as if he were scoring the inner workings of a nervous system under attack. Sharp strings slice through quiet passages. Melodies form hesitate, then collapse into discord. It's a soundscape that never fully settles, mirroring the film's unstable emotional core. The recording sessions became notoriously demanding. Williams asked the orchestra to stretch notes to the edge of discomfort, creating tones that felt physically invasive. Musicians recalled being unsure whether they were playing music or controlled chaos. That unease proved essential. The score doesn't underline the drama, it infiltrates it, creeping into scenes where the visual tension alone isn't enough to convey the character's psychological unraveling. De Palma relied heavily on the music to bridge emotional gaps. In moments where characters barely speak, the score advances the narrative, revealing dread before the audience recognizes it. Williams crafted certain motifs to mimic irregular heartbeats, causing subtle anxiety that most viewers register only subconsciously. What makes the music unforgettable is its refusal to offer solace. Williams created a composition that behaves like the film itself, relentless, invasive, and shaped by forces that refuse to be understood. Fact 8. The amusement park chase in The Fury is remembered for its frantic momentum, but the chaos behind the camera was equally intense. De Palma wanted the sequence to feel uncontrollable, as though danger were emerging from every corner of the park. Instead of controlling the environment meticulously, he embraced unpredictability. Real rides ran at full speed. Wind gusts were unplanned. Extras were frequently unaware of which direction the action would burst from next. One of the most dramatic moments, a Ferris wheel spinning beyond its intended cycle, wasn't in the script. The braking mechanism jammed mid-take, forcing the actors to continue improvising while the crew scrambled to regain control. De Palma kept the cameras rolling, believing the genuine disorientation added a chaotic authenticity no rehearsal could match. Camera operators navigated unstable platforms and narrow pathways to capture the action. One operator reportedly sprained his knee while tracking Douglas across a collapsing wooden walkway. The injuries were minor, but the fear was real. Cast and crew later admitted they often couldn't distinguish between rehearsed danger and actual risk during the shoot. The resulting sequence feels alive because it was alive, unpredictable, volatile, and fueled by the kind of tension that only reality can supply. Fact 9. Before The Fury entered full production, De Palma explored the world of contemporary parapsychology to ground the film's psychic elements in something more unsettling than fantasy. He consulted with researchers involved in early remote viewing experiments and studies on anomalous cognition. These weren't fringe occultists, they were part of programs quietly supported by government agencies hoping to turn human consciousness into a strategic tool. These researchers told De Palma that if telekinesis existed, it would not be a glamorous ability. It would manifest as physical strain, migraines, sensory overload, involuntary tremors, and emotional fragmentation. De Palma incorporated those insights directly into Gillian's character arc, portraying her power as something corrosive, not empowering. Every psychic episode drains her as though she's borrowing strength from parts of herself she can't afford to lose. One consultant reportedly withdrew from the project after reviewing the script, claiming it edged too close to real classified methodologies. Whether this was paranoia or sincerity is unknown, but the abrupt departure became a whisper legend among the crew. This brush with real-world experimentation gave the film an eerie credibility. Its psychic violence doesn't feel like fantasy, but like a distorted reflection of research that someone hoped audiences would never think too deeply about. Fact 10. The rooftop pursuit in The Fury works because it feels as unstable as the world its characters inhabit. De Palma constructed the sequence from multiple real buildings, stitching them together through clever camera placement to form one disorienting terrain. Each rooftop was chosen for a different reason. One had the right height, another offered a precarious ledge, and a third provided the long, narrow run-up he needed for momentum. When edited together, the geography becomes intentionally inconsistent, giving the viewer the unsettling sense that the city is warping under Peter Sands' desperation. Kirk Douglas performed much of the chase himself, and De Palma exploited his physical commitment to ground the scene in realism. Instead of giving Douglas strict beats to follow, he encouraged him to move with instinct rather than choreography. That choice created jagged, unpredictable rhythms in his movement. At times, Douglas seemed on the verge of losing his footing, and the tension captured in those moments was entirely genuine. Even the wind which whipped dust into the actor's face was unscripted. The production couldn't control rooftop gusts, so they simply embraced them. The result is a sequence where danger doesn't look orchestrated. It looks discovered moment by moment, as if the building edges and unstable surfaces are reacting to the character instead of accommodating him. De Palma's goal wasn't spectacle. It was to place the audience inside a pursuit where every step feels like a dare against gravity and fate. Fact 11. Richard H. Klein's cinematography for The Fury feels like the visual language of surveillance rather than storytelling. Instead of lighting faces with clarity, he lit rooms as if they were observing the characters. Light sources were positioned high, cold, and impersonal, creating shadows that stretched across surfaces like silent witnesses. Many scenes appear overlit in places and underlit in others, not by accident, but to reflect a world where emotional transparency is impossible and danger hides in corners human eyes rarely examine. One of Klein's boldest decisions was to embrace reflective materials even when they complicated production. Mirrors, glass panels, and polished steel frequently caught the camera's presence, forcing the crew to adjust positions frame by frame. Rather than remove these elements, Klein leaned into them. He understood that reflections reinforced the film's themes: fractured identities, constant observation, and the unsettling sense that every character is being duplicated, tracked, or watched from somewhere they cannot see. His work in the psychic observation room remains one of the film's most distinct visual achievements. He created isolated pockets of light that illuminated only parts of Irving's face, leaving the rest drifting in darkness. Those visual divides mimic the character's internal split between control and intrusion. The audience isn't simply watching a performance, they're witnessing a mind being dissected by its environment. Klein didn't shoot The Fury as a thriller. He shot it as a psychological autopsy. Fact 12. Editing The Fury became a balancing act between narrative clarity and emotional distortion. Paul Hirsch, fresh from editing Star Wars, approached the material with a meticulous sense of rhythm, only to realize that De Palma wanted something far more fractured. Instead of crafting smooth continuity, Hirsch was tasked with building a visual structure that felt like it was under psychic pressure. Cuts arrive abruptly, scenes collide rather than transition, and images overlap in ways that mimic intrusive thoughts invading the frame. The telepathic link scenes between Jillian and Robin are the clearest example. Hirsch constructed them out of fragments, heat distortions, blurred, motion-interrupted audio to simulate the overwhelming flood of sensations between two minds in crisis. These fragments weren't written into the script. Hirsch and De Palma discovered them in the editing room, experimenting with ways to represent psychic trauma without resorting to conventional effects. The more chaotic the footage felt, the more it aligned with the film's emotional intent. Early test screenings revealed that audiences found certain sequences disorienting. De Palma considered that a success. He believed that psychic horror should disorient, not comfort. Scenes that smoothed out the narrative were removed entirely, even if beautifully acted, because they provided too much stability. The final cut embraces imbalance as both aesthetic and theme. In The Fury, the edit itself becomes an antagonist, unpredictable, invasive, and impossible to escape. Fact 13. The practical effects in The Fury were not just technical achievements. They were emotional devices designed to make the film feel physically dangerous. De Palma insisted that every disruption caused by psychic force should interact with the real world in ways the audience could sense. That meant avoiding optical tricks whenever possible. Instead, the crew engineered mechanical rigs that yanked furniture sideways, shattered glass at precise angles, and sent objects flying with violent unpredictability. Many of these rigs were built in cramped spaces, leaving little margin for error. During one rehearsal, a set piece fractured earlier than planned, scattering debris across the room and narrowly missing Irving. The incident shook the crew, but De Palma saw an opportunity. He refined the timing of the device, rather than removing it, believing that the raw, imperfect energy contributed to the film's authenticity. He wanted the room to feel like it had a nervous system of its own, responding to the character's emotional turmoil with sudden violent spasms. What made these effects truly unsettling was the weight behind them. Objects didn't float, they were hurled. Windows didn't crack, they exploded outward as if something inside the characters was forcing its way free. Irving performed many scenes surrounded by real moving machinery, and her reactions reflected the unpredictability she felt. The practical effects weren't mere visuals. They were sensations captured in real time, turning psychic violence into something tangible. Fact 14. The Fury story of government exploitation draws much of its power from the political atmosphere in which it was created. The 1970s were defined by scandals, secrecy, and a growing distrust of institutions once thought untouchable. De Palma, deeply attuned to the cultural moment, infused the film with a quiet accusation that systems built to protect people often end up consuming them. Rather than grounding the antagonists in ideology, he shaped them as bureaucratic shadows whose motivations are obscured by layers of classified language and patriotic rhetoric. Early drafts of the screenplay flirted with direct references to real intelligence operations rumored to involve mind control experiments. De Palma eventually removed these explicit mentions, not to avoid controversy, but to maintain a sense of universal menace. A named agency can be confronted, a nameless one becomes mythic. By stripping away specifics, he built an antagonist that feels like an amalgamation of every institution the public had begun to fear. Executives expressed concern that viewers might interpret the film as a direct indictment of U.S. intelligence practices. De Palma dismissed the idea. His intention wasn't political commentary. It was emotional truth. He wanted the audience to feel what it's like to be caught in a system that sees people as variables rather than human beings. That's why the film's cruelty resonates. The real horror isn't psychic manipulation, it's the ease with which an institution can justify it. Fact 15. De Palma's guiding principle for The Fury was that psychic terror only matters if grounded in emotional suffering. He believed the supernatural loses its impact if detached from the human condition, so he framed Gillian and Robin not as powerful figures, but as victims navigating trauma they never agreed to inherit it. Their psychic abilities become metaphors for violations inflicted upon them long before their powers manifest. To capture this, De Palma encouraged Irving and Andrew Stevens to build performances rooted in grief rather than fear. Gillian's visions were crafted to resemble invasive memories rather than supernatural phenomena. Her trembling, her sudden loss of breath, her distant gaze, all were shaped from De Palma's belief that psychic intrusion should feel like the resurfacing of a buried wound. Stevens approached Robin with a similar philosophy, playing him not as a vengeful prodigy, but as a young man collapsing under the weight of manipulation. This emotional approach transforms the film's climactic destruction. The explosions and psychic ruptures are not spectacles but consequences of unresolved pain. The violence becomes a physical manifestation of something the characters have been forced to internalize for too long. That is why the film's brutality lingers. It isn't about what these characters can do, it's about what has already been done to them. Fact 16. The hospital environment in The Fury was engineered to feel unsettling in ways that had little to do with gore or supernatural danger. De Palma wanted a place that looked sterile but radiated emotional contamination, a facility where the architecture itself seemed complicit in the violations committed inside it. Instead of designing a traditional medical ward, the crew incorporated equipment salvaged from outdated institutions, monitors that flickered without input, beds positioned awkwardly against walls, and cold surfaces that reflected every movement with the sharp clarity of interrogation lights. During filming, the hospital set developed an almost oppressive character of its own. The air conditioning malfunctioned, repeatedly lowering the temperature far below comfort. De Palma refused to halt production, insisting that the chill added a layer of vulnerability to Amy Irving's performance. The cold made her breathing shallow and her posture tense, producing an authenticity no acting technique could replicate. She later described the hospital sequence as the moment she felt most exposed, not because of the restraints or the cameras, but because the environment felt like it was stripping her down to her nerves. The unease viewers feel during these scenes isn't accidental. It's the result of a carefully orchestrated psychological landscape, a place where the promise of safety has been hollowed out and replaced by something clinical, indifferent, and quietly hostile. In The Fury, the hospital becomes a metaphor for every institution that claims to protect while quietly participating in harm. Fact 17. The climactic explosion in The Fury became a cinematic touchstone, but its creation was far from the clean, controlled effect it appears to be. The special effects team spent weeks engineering a life-sized replica of John Cassavetes, layering silicone prosthetic musculature and gelatinous compounds to mimic the elasticity and density of real tissue. Internally, they embedded charges calibrated to burst at varying intensities, producing an outward ripple rather than a simple detonation. Capturing the explosion required multiple high-speed cameras placed at different elevations. Some were shielded behind thick panels, others were left exposed to the debris. When the detonation finally occurred, the blast force exceeded calculations, scattering fragments with such velocity that one camera lens shattered instantly. De Palma decided to keep that shot, embracing the moment the film itself seemed to fracture under the impact of the story. Because the prosthetic body was so expensive and so delicate, there was no possibility of a second attempt. The take scene in the final cut is the only one that was ever filmed. That knowledge adds an eerie weight to the scene. What appears to be a meticulously crafted effect is in truth a singular and unrepeatable moment, a violent release of narrative tension captured in real time. The explosion's power doesn't come from its brutality alone. It is the culmination of manipulation, fear, and psychic pressure compressed into one instant of absolute rupture. Fact 18. Sound design in The Fury became one of the film's most experimental elements, functioning as an invisible extension of its psychic themes. Long before digital sound manipulation, De Palma and his audio team constructed eerie tonal textures using purely analog techniques. They recorded the hum of aging electrical generators, distorted the frequencies, and layered them beneath scenes involving psychic strain. These sounds were not meant to be noticed consciously. They were woven into the film like nervous system signals, subtly tightening the audience's emotional response. The team also experimented with reversed speech breaths, slowed to unnatural rhythms, and metallic scrapes produced by dragging tools across detuned piano strings. These effects, played at barely audible volumes, created an atmosphere that seeped into the subconscious. During early screenings, viewers reported feeling uneasy without knowing why. That reaction was exactly what De Palma sought, not fear through volume, but fear through intrusion. In scenes where Gillian senses Robin's suffering, the sound design blends their emotional frequencies. Faint echoes overlap, blurring the boundary between two minds. De Palma believed that psychic horror should sound like an internal scream trying to claw its way outward, and the audio team translated that idea into compositions that feel invasive even in silence. The beauty of the soundscape is its subtlety. It doesn't announce itself. It infiltrates the way psychic pain would if it were real. Fact 19. Over the years, whispers have circulated about an alternate conclusion to The Fury, a version that never made it past the editing room, but lingered in the memories of those who claim to have seen early storyboards. According to these accounts, De Palma once considered ending the film not with a single act of destruction, but with a gradual psychic implosion centered on Gillian. The concept involved hallways bending unnaturally, inward ceiling tiles trembling as if pulled by invisible pressure, and Gillian standing motionless at the center of an architectural collapse born entirely from her emotional overload. No footage from this supposed version has ever surfaced, and no official statement confirms its existence. Yet, fragments of the idea remain embedded in behind-the-scenes recollections. Some crew members recalled sketches depicting warped geometric shapes, while others vaguely remembered discussions about portraying psychic power not as an outward explosion, but as an inward collapse. Whether these memories reflect genuine abandoned ideas or the natural fog of a long production is impossible to say. What matters is why the rumor persists. It persists because it aligns with the film's emotional core. Gillian's final moment in the released version ends on a point of catharsis, but her suffering suggests a far deeper unraveling than what the camera ultimately shows. The idea of an alternate ending, one that exposes the full cost of her psychic burden, feels like a truth the film almost revealed. And that unspoken possibility continues to haunt the legacy of The Fury. Fact 20. When The Fury premiered, the reaction was not shock at the violence, but confusion at the emotional disquiet that followed viewers long after they left the theater. Critics struggled to categorize it. Was it a thriller, a horror film, a psychological study? Audiences sensed something else entirely, a pressure beneath the surface, a lingering tremor that didn't dissipate with the credits. Surveys from early screenings documented dreams about surveillance, uncontrolled abilities, and bodies coming apart. People didn't feel frightened by what they saw. They felt disturbed by what they sensed. This reaction stemmed from De Palma's refusal to offer narrative closure. There is no clear moral anchor, no comforting rational explanation. Even the psychic phenomena remain unexplained, presented not as mysteries to be solved, but as wounds that resist interpretation. The unresolved tension pulls at the viewer's subconscious, leaving them unsettled without fully understanding why. Studio executives debated whether to tone down this ambiguity, yet Palma rejected every suggestion. His intention was not to soothe, but to confront. In the decades since, the film has accumulated a reputation for emotional aftershocks rather than shock value. Its horror doesn't shout. It lingers. It waits. It resurfaces at unexpected moments, the way a half-remembered nightmare pulls at the edges of waking thought. The Fury endures not because of its spectacle, but because of the psychological residue it leaves behind, a quiet question that refuses to resolve itself. Bonus fact: among the quieter legends surrounding The Fury is a peculiar pattern of electrical interference that plagued the production. Crew members recalled monitors glitching for a heartbeat, overhead lights dimming without cause, and audio equipment capturing faint distortions that vanished the moment technicians attempted to trace them. At first, everyone blamed faulty wiring in the older studio spaces. But the interruptions occurred too consistently and always during scenes tied to psychic distress, especially moments centered on Gillian's escalating fear. The timing was unsettling enough that even the more skeptical members of the team began to notice. One sound operator claimed he once played back a recording from an otherwise silent take and heard a rhythmic throb beneath the ambient noise, faint but unnatural, like a second pulse layered beneath reality. Attempts to isolate the anomaly failed. It disappeared into the tape as though it had never existed. De Palma publicly dismissed the disturbances as technical quirks, but privately acknowledged that they added a strange atmospheric tension to the shoot. Whether the phenomena were genuine malfunctions or the byproduct of heightened nerves, they created an emotional feedback loop. The more the film delved into psychic rupture, the more the environment seemed to mimic it. The crew eventually joked that the set had absorbed the film's energy, a superstition born half from fear, half from fascination. What lingers isn't whether the anomalies were real, but how convincingly they mirrored the story being told. Sometimes a film doesn't just depict the unseen. It invites it in, allowing cracks in the machinery to echo cracks in the characters themselves. If you've stayed with us through every hidden detail, then you already know The Fury is more than a story about psychic force. It's a map of wounds left unspoken, of experiments carried out in silence, of people reshaped by pressures no one was meant to endure. These facts reveal only part of what the film carries beneath its surface. The rest is yours to interpret. Tell us which moment changed the way you see this film and what other worlds you want us to uncover next. Do you think The Fury was warning us about power or about the people who believe they deserve to control it?